the customer does not understand or appreciate perfection. So like, why would we try to show up and be the perfect version of ourselves? That just screams inauthenticity. Be so perfect that you can afford to be imperfect.
Everyone is a salesperson in some capacity, whether you're selling an idea, your skills, or actual products and services. Forget those scripted moments and the age-old stigma of sales. According to sales mindset advisors, USC professors, authors, and founding partners of the Agency 18 Sales Consultancy, Colin Coggins and Garrett Brown, being yourself is all that's required.
Garrett and I got in a room when we fell in love, right? And we had this conversation. And the conversation turned into our modality, which has turned into this class, into our consultancy, into this book. And it's really simple. The best salespeople in the world are the antithesis of who we expect them to be. Like the greatest salespeople that we've ever met, they're not the most gregarious and they're definitely not the most extroverted. Like what they are the most self-aware people in the room. Like they are pathologically optimistic. They treat their customers as if they already purchased. And so that conversation is completely different than the conversation where someone's trying to win.
A lot of the best salespeople that we're talking to and that we know, they use the fact that they don't know everything. So if a customer asks them a really tough question, they're able to go, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question, but let's go figure out the answer together. And suddenly now, instead of being in an adversarial salesperson versus me conversation, it's okay, now we're on the same side of the table. Let's go get answers and see if this actually works. It's an art, but it's a really important distinction.
What is that magnetic energy where like people want to come to you and ask you to buy? Like, how do you get people to come to you? And this is going to sound very counterintuitive. Great salespeople fall in love with their customers. Like, how could you fall in love with someone that you've never met before? Well, you can't, but you can fall in love with the idea of someone. Like, what is the best version of yourself? It looks like the version of yourself that was in junior high when you had a crush on someone. Like, you didn't talk more. You probably talked less. Like, you treated them like they were the most important person in the world. You were looking for the good, and you found it.
Sales is a really important blend of logic and emotion. And so, the logic in a sale is the data. If you're selling a car, it's the safety features and the steel beams in the door and the miles per gallon and all that stuff. But then you've got the emotional side of it, the way the car makes me feel when I'm driving down the street, or the fact that I have kids sitting in the back seat and I need to feel that they're safe if we get in an accident. And so, that self-awareness and that emotional intelligence comes into play as you learn to identify what balance that needs to be. Like if you're talking to an engineer or CTO, you might need to be 80-20 in terms of the data and the logic. But if you are talking to somebody that's a little bit more of a creative, then the emotion might need to outweigh the logic. So always be thinking about that balance between logic and emotion as you're having a conversation, and try to identify and have the self-awareness to identify what the person you're talking to cares about. And by the way, a great way to figure that out is to just ask them some impactful questions and figure it out.
With decades of experience as practitioners and sales leaders, Colin and Garrett share their unique unsold mindset approach to growing revenue by focusing on a culture of authenticity, social and self-awareness, and purpose.
One of the things that we teach that we think is unique in terms of mindset to get a culture right is giving and receiving feedback, and coaching up and down the chain, but also each other.
Culture is a very scary word when it comes to sales. Culture independent of sales is something that everyone is going to want to impart their own stamp on it. And so we define culture as what people do when you're not looking. But more importantly, where the friction points in culture lie. And they're normally where people are talking shit about other people together. Like, what if we could create a culture where feedback was deemed a gift? And we started defining what that was, right? Like, if you had to continue to put those reps in, you start to create this culture where you're polarizing, water cooler talk. You're celebrating receiving and giving feedback. But what ends up happening is that you foster this culture of learners versus knowers, and creators versus victims. And salespeople have the biggest egos. And so there's a lot of ways that we can mitigate the ego inflation. One way is like we tell future founders, like, hey, you hire anyone you want. Just make sure that first, like, you tell your co-founders why they're smarter than you. Or we'll tell people, listen, think about like the merits in which you base promoting people. People do not get promoted from the top up, right? They get promoted from the bottom up. So like, if you wanted to get promoted, the only way you would get promoted is if someone next to you was saying how much of a better job they were doing because of you.
On a mission to change the way the world thinks about sales, Colin and Garrett explain why being a good person and good salesperson are not mutually exclusive, and how the best salespeople, including those who don't have sales in their title, can reframe their perceptions to become deeply engaged in and satisfied by their work.
At the end of the day, look, everything that we talk about is geared toward the mission, which is how do we change the way the world feels about salespeople and thinks about salespeople by changing the way they think about themselves? Why are we hiding behind titles like Chief Revenue Officer, which Colin and I have, or Business Development Representative? Like we're salespeople, and so if Colin and I succeed in this mission, then we can destigmatize that word and have everybody be proud of going out and helping somebody find a product or service that's going to make their life better at the end of the day.